Okay, thanks everyone for coming to tonight's event for a discussion on Trump's tariffs, building a working class response. Tonight is going to be relatively informal. We're hoping things can be, we can have a little bit of a discussion, political discussion on the matter at hand, right, and the sort of crisis that's come from the implementation of the tariffs from Trump, and frankly also the crisis that seems to be coming now repeatedly from the vacillations. Pulled back, reapplied, pulled back, reapplied, and the kind of, now we're already seeing mini restructurings in the economy from this, right? So we'll get into all of that, but I think there's a lot of interesting points to touch on, and a lot of, I think this potentially represents an opportunity for those of us who also want to build a better world, right? We're going to try to nail down on that a little bit tonight in the discussion. So, just very quickly to introduce our speakers here. First up will be Paramjit Singh. Paramjit's associated with York University, Toronto, and Punjab University. He's published over 30 research papers in journals of repute, and has had articles featured in Jacobin as well. You should all check that out. And then following up Paramjit will be Sam Gindin. Sam was the research director of the Canadian Auto Workers, now Unifor, from 1974 to 2000. He's also the co-author with Leo Panich of The Making of Global Capitalism, and also the two of these guys are members of the Socialist Project as well, just as a bit of a note there. So, oh yeah, and my name's Matt. I'm with the SP and I'm the coordinator of the Leo Panich School. So without further ado, why don't we go Paramjit first, and then Sam, and then we'll have a bit of discussion.
So first, my apology that because of my accent, if there is any word or any sentence that you are not able to understand, you can raise your hand, I can repeat that. Because I come from Global South and our accent is like that. So let's start with this. So what I will do, I will take 25 minutes, and if you guys want, I can continue, but I will raise a couple of important points about tariffs. So one thing that you all may have witnessed in recent past, that all the mainstream political parties, many unions, many activists, and also the new liberal thinkers, new classical economists, all are anti-Trump now, which is a right thing, but for a wrong reason. So I say that in this type of situation, we need organic union leaders, organic intellectuals, and organic activists who are right for right reasons. So in this discussion, I will try to raise a couple of important points. One is that we need to understand the concrete material reality. So if we want to act, then the first thing is that we should understand the concrete material reality. Second, we should be able to differentiate between immediate and ultimate possibilities. First, we should respond immediately, then we think about ultimate response. So I will raise 3 points. One, in 5-7 minutes, I will try to decode Trump's grand strategy. In second point, I will quickly try to highlight the implications of Trump's grand strategy on Canadian economy. I have a very limited knowledge about Canadian economy. So if there is any difficult question on Canadian economy, I will pass that question to Sam or Greg.
And I'll pass it back.
Third, I will try to spend more time on talking about a question of self-sufficiency, because this is a very complicated question and different people interpret this question differently. So I will take a socialist stand to explain that what it means. So my first point, what is this grand strategy, Trump's grand strategy? So I will try to answer 2 questions to understand this strategy. One, why Trump is doing this. Second, What are the implications of this on American working class? First point, that there are two reasons, as per my understanding, behind this tariff politics. One, you all may know that US has highest trade deficit in the world. Highest trade deficit in the world, and at the same time you are super rich country. So this is not first time that this sort of situation is there. The same was the case with Britain, England, when it was in its declining phase. When the imperialism was in declining phase, they had the same problem. So Trump feels that he can use tariff as an instrument to deindustrialize other countries and to export unemployment of United States to other countries. This is one thing that he really wants to do. Second thing that he wants to do is he wants to sustain the unipolar movement of US. For that, he is trying to reconfigure the global geopolitics. So as for my understanding, what he's trying to do, his main focus is China. He wants to reduce the dominance or impact of China on world trading system. So I will give you one number. If you look into China's trade in the world economy, 33% of the world's trade is only China's trade. And if you add the share of US plus European Union, they are equal to China. So one thing that Trump tries to do is that he wants to reduce the influence of China on global trading system. So how you can do that? So one thing is that to try to discipline your allies. So first he is trying to discipline allies, which includes European Union, Canada and Mexico. So he was saying that you should pay us imperial rent in the form of tariffs, because we have provided you market for last 50-70 years. And second, he is saying that because we are providing you security, so you should pay us imperial rent to United States. Second thing, in case of China, he is very sharp in his strategy in a way that he wants to integrate Russia, and he wants to reduce the trade between European Union and China. So this whole strategy is byproduct of isolating China in world system. So this is his strategy. And what are the implications of this strategy on US working class? So that is the main point, that how it will impact US working class. One thing that Trump is very sure, that he doesn't want to increase fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit means that he doesn't want to incur more deficit to support domestic working class. What he wants to do, he wants to give more opportunity to the American corporate class to grab all the activities which state was doing previously. So he wants to increase the command of corporate class on all the activities, all the important things in United States. So this is one, because he is not ready to incur more fiscal deficit. So that is one thing. Second thing that he is trying to do is that if you see, he imposed tariffs on imported goods. So many US-based small industries and petty producers are using imported raw material to produce goods and services. So it will increase their cost of production. And there are millions of petty producers in United States, small industrialists. It will increase their cost of production because the raw material that they use, its cost will increase. So what will happen then? They will become less competitive in the world market. At the same time, they will also become less competitive in United States vis-a-vis big corporations. So it will increase the command of big corporate capital on United States domestic market by throwing these millions of petty producers and small industrialists into the labor market. So this is other thing that he is trying to do. So what will happen again after this? then those corporations will increase the markup prices in the United States. Price will increase in the United States and implications are going to be on workers. Now, workers have to pay more to purchase same goods and services which they were able to purchase at a lower price. This is one. Second thing, that it will squeeze the wage rate of workers, because if there is an increase in natural rate of unemployment in the economy, particularly in the United States, it will reduce the bargaining power of the workers in US. So this declining bargaining power will lead to more inequality in US, and ultimately this declining bargaining power of the working class will increase the household indebtedness in the United States. On an average, I have calculated, on an average, every newborn child in the United States is under $100,000 debt. It will increase further, right? So this is about US. Now, quickly, what are the implications on Canadian economy? You all know what are the implications on Canadian economy. I will give you 2-3 numbers to understand better. One, 67% of Canadian GDP, it comes from trade. Very high in the world, 67%. And 77% of Canadian exports or Canadian exports are to United States, 77%. There is no country in the world where Canada sends more than 5% goods, even to Mexico. So you are heavily dependent on United States. So this is one. The other thing is that in terms of imports, 44% of the Canadian imports are from United States. And 13% of the goods and services that we consume on daily basis are United States manufactured goods and services in our consumer basket. So Canadian export sector support 3.6 million jobs. So I will give you one implication of Trump's tariffs. Due to tariffs last month, this is from StatCan, Canada has lost 62,000 full-time jobs in 1 month. 62,000 full-time jobs which were compensated by the part-time jobs. Compensated by the part-time jobs, even then there is 33,000 net job loss in 1 month. And the unemployment rate is 6.7%. 1.3 million workers who are ready to work here are not able to find work because of these tariffs. This is one very simple implication. This is because of high dependency on United States. High dependency on United States, right? So at this moment, it is very important for us to rethink about our dependency. So I will not say that we should, many people say that we should start thinking about restructuring our economy. This is not a moment to restructure. This is a moment to diversify. And there is a difference between these two words. Restructuring happens if your economy is operating at full employment. You have to diversify because you cannot afford to shift workers from one type of jobs to other type of jobs. This is restructuring. It takes time. There is a time lag of taking workers from one job to another job. So instead of that, if you already have unemployment in the economy, 6.7%, the first thing is that diversify your economy. Try to give work to those workers. This is first thing which is very important. So in this context, there is a debate about question of self-sufficiency. So this question is that why countries need self-sufficiency? So in this context, there are many versions of self-sufficiency. The most popular version of self-sufficiency is far right. Germany is a classic example of this notion of self-sufficiency, and they tried this. And when socialists talk about self-sufficiency, then there is a lot of confusion between socialist self-sufficiency and far right self-sufficiency. So I will differentiate both. Let me give you some features of far right self-sufficiency. Far right self-sufficiency is expansionary in nature. It is expansionary in the sense, first you make other countries dependent on you, then you invade those countries. And this is a case of Germany in case of Southeastern Europe. First they made those countries dependent on Germany, then they invaded those countries. This is one characteristic of far right self-sufficiency. Second, and Trump is saying same thing openly, that he wants to integrate, want to take Canada, he want to take Greenland, Panama Canal and Gaza, right? Some people say that this is rhetoric, but this is an important feature of declining imperial power when the political power is captured by the far right. When political power of an empire is captured by the far right, these type of characteristics are quite common. This is one. Second is Trump's self-sufficiency, his notion of self-sufficiency is anti-immigrants. When you blame others for your misery, or when you blame others to hide the principal contradiction of your society, this is other characteristic of far right self-sufficiency. So what he is trying to do, he blame others about the stagnation of real wage rate in United States. He blame others behind inequality. He blame others about jobs. So he is trying to hide the principal contradiction of US capitalism by blaming others. Third, the third characteristic of this type of self-sufficiency is that there is always an alliance between political right and big corporate class. So this is a great opportunity for the political right to open all these spheres to the big corporate capital in the name of self-sufficiency. And Trump is doing same. And the last is that this far right notion of self-sufficiency is anti-environment and sustainability. They always call climate crisis as a bogus propaganda. But at the same time, militarization and national security becomes a very important question without any direct enemies. So this is the point of these are far right notions of self-sufficiency. Now, what type of self-sufficiency we want to talk about? That is socialist self-sufficiency. Socialist self-sufficiency through delinking. So what is socialist self-sufficiency? Let me define. In socialist self-sufficiency, delinking means you want to break from world capitalistic system and its logic of worldwide value. So world capitalistic system, you want to break from that system and its logic of accumulation. This is one. The other is that it means that you are refusing to submit the fate of millions of workers to globalization or to the logic of globalization. So delinking doesn't mean socialists want to escape the crisis. Delinking means socialists will act in crisis in a particular way to exploit the crisis as an opportunity to save the fate of millions of workers. So some important features of this and the other point, when we are talking about socialist delinking, you map out what is short period, what is medium period and what is long period. What is immediate task, what is medium term task and what is long term task. You do not intermingle all this. Sometimes people say that okay, international unity is most important thing without reading the concrete material conditions. That is not socialist delinking. Now couple of features. One, it is not expansionary in nature. Socialist delinking doesn't have any imperial agenda. It is not expansionary in nature. This is one feature of socialist delinking. Second, it advocates for national self-sufficiency in production, particularly food and essential goods and services which workers require for their day-to-day life. Food is critical and all the basics should be produced in the national boundaries of the country. It advocates for that. Yes, there may be some goods and services that you cannot produce. Those can be imported, but majority of the goods can be produced. Third is, it advocates for economic planning through states' active role in production and distribution. It demands welfare state. It demands state which actively involve in production and trade. So this is other feature. The other is socialist self-sufficiency is not against trade. It is not against international trade, but it is against capitalist free trade. And I will explain, if you give me a time, what is the meaning of this. It advocates managed and cooperation-based trade. So socialist delinking doesn't mean that socialist delinking is not in favor of international cooperation. It is in favor of international cooperation when it comes to science, when it comes to ideas, when it comes to culture, when it comes to technology. But it is not in favor of a free trade where producers of one country compete with other country, and the benefits of one country's producers are based upon the losses of other countries' producers. And last, it is eco-socialist. Socialist delinking is eco-socialist. It advocates for sustainable management of natural resources for social good. So these are some of the characteristics. So what are the mechanisms? So if I have a time, I can talk about like 2 more points. What are the main mechanisms of socialist delinking? There are many. One is that when we are talking about socialist delinking, there are 4 things that I can highlight. 1, in socialist delinking, we have to push the state to play an active role in the economy, for which we need a social movement. This is 1. Second, we need to rethink about the notion of free trade. We have to debunk that notion. Third, we need to think about capital controls. And last, we should delink from imperial ambitions. So I will focus upon 2. First, pressure on state for expansionary fiscal policy means that pressure on state to spend more in the economy. This is one very important aspect of socialist delinking. So if you see, most of the policy institutions in the world, government policy institutions, most of the universities in the world, elite universities of the world. So I was looking into, like, if I have to calculate, we may have more than 500 economists in Toronto city. More than 500 economists. And I haven't read
There's
even
only 2 here though.
I haven't read even a single good article by those economists. They are trained in prestigious universities of the world. They have good understanding of everything, but they are not ready to leave that new classical economics, to come out from that comfort zone for the sake of well-being of millions of workers. Right? So when I'm saying that active role of state in the economy, it means that you have to get from your comfort zone, that is new classical economics and new liberalism. So we need to pressurize the state to delink from new classical doctrine of economic policy to save the fate of millions of workers. So we need to build a working class movement for that. So in this context, we need to focus on reducing our dependency on United States. And how you can do that? There are 2 ways state can do this. One, state can do this. One is that state can do this by borrowing from the market. Other state can do is that state can impose taxes on wealthy and redistribute those taxes in a way which can help to diversify the economy. Let me focus upon first point. When a country is in a crisis, state cannot impose taxes on rich capitalist class. And there is a reason for that. If you have a very high level of unemployment in the economy, then state feels that if it imposes taxes on wealthy, it will disturb the animal spirit in the economy, which is already very low. Animal spirit means spirit of capitalist class to produce more. It will crowd out the private investment. So state doesn't want to take that risk in a crisis situation. Second possibility is that state can do this by incurring deficit. Deficit means that state can issue government bonds in the market, and government bonds are second safest asset after gold. So people who feel that there is a crisis in the market, many private players, they will purchase government bonds. Government can give a very low rate of interest on those bonds and use that money for diversification of the economy. So this is one thing that state can do. And state will not do this thing of its own. We need a working class social movement to pressurize the state to take this step. Because state's own character is new liberal. And state works like a rational capitalistic agent. It always wants its accounts are in balance, right? It treats, so this new classical economics, it defines state in this terminology, that state should not spend more. State should take care of its income and spend according to income, or try to save a little bit. So state has to leave this new classical accountant's notion and should incur some deficits, and there is a huge possibility in Canadian economy to incur deficit. What is deficit in Canadian economy? It is just 1%, 1.6% or 1%, nothing. Take it to 3% and use that money to diversify the economy or to increase the welfare expenditure in the economy, because this has multiplier effect. If you incur some deficit as a state, it will push other people to spend more in the market. Private players will produce more in the more because of this, because you are injecting some money to the economy and generating some employment, and it has a lot of forward and backward linkages. So this is one, that socialist delinking requires strong state, and state should be pro people, not pro corporates. This is one. Second is, when Trump has introduced tariffs, so I saw even the left became anti-Trump. In other words, everybody was for free trade. All of us were in favor of free trade. So now it is very important to understand, do you think that free trade is a good idea? So this free trade notion is given by David Ricardo in the 19th century. And this free trade doctrine says that if you trade with each other without any barriers, it is beneficial for all the parties. Beneficial for all the parties. And his own country, Britain, when he was writing this, Britain has a history of highest tariffs in the world for longest time to protect their own industries. So they started tariffs in 1700 and they continued till 1775. And this is longest in the history to protect their own industries. And David Ricardo was writing in favor of free trade at a time when Britain requires some cheap material from the other countries, because you have colonies. You can get cheap material from other countries. You don't bother how many people are dying because of that. But free trade notion is a very vague notion. We should not favor free trade. So the reason is that if you really want to enhance national self-sufficiency and want to increase the bargaining power of the domestic producers and workers, we should exit from free trade. Protectionism is very important. So the capitalist free trade doctrine, this notion, is based upon competition. And if you see, since 1970s, this free trade has played a very important role to globalize the neoliberal project. The competition that was produced by the free trade has displaced millions of petty producers and workers around the world. Free trade is responsible for decline in bargaining power of the workers. Free trade is responsible for the stagnation of real wages of the workers. Free trade is responsible for growing inequality in the world. So instead of favoring this free trade notion, we need to understand that this is a compulsion that was imposed by the new liberalism. We should de-link from this free trade. And one country, so because this is based upon one country can gain only if other country loses. We don't want that sort of trade. So what type of trade we want? In 2 minutes, I will finish. What type of trade we want? We are not against trade, but that trade should be based upon bilateral agreements between the countries. It should be based upon cooperation, not competition. It should be based upon cooperation. And we should trade those commodities which we cannot produce in our own country. We should identify those sectors and those things. So these are some of the points. So when I'm saying delinking means that our state needs to be disobedient to the new liberal logic of capitalism. We need to delink from new liberalism. If we really want to save the fate of millions of workers. So at this juncture, it is very important for us to rethink that we need an alliance between organic union leaders, organic intellectuals, organic activists to criticize new liberal logic as much as we can if we really want to save the fate of workers in this country. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to actually give a sense of what this moment is more historically, and then talk about the politics. Yeah, wave to me if I start letting this thing sag. But of course, after I listen to Paramjit, I want to argue with him about something. So I don't want to get into a debate here about that. I mean, one of the things that really strikes me about what Paramjit is saying is we're at a moment that we actually have to learn a lot more about how the economy works and how the global economy works. And this is an important part of where I want to get to, what that actually means for us politically. And I'm just going to throw a bit of a contrary argument, even though I think I agree with almost everything where you were going, Paramjit. One is I see the crisis in the US differently than you do. I see the US, the problem is that the US capital in the US has actually been doing very well. If you look at American economic statistics compared to the rest of the world, the problem is that that's all come, as you were saying, at the expense of workers. So the problem isn't a problem of a crisis in profits or capital accumulation. The problem is actually the class distribution of income. And what's happened over time is that at first, workers adjusted to it. Second earners, their spouses moved to working full-time, they went into debt. But eventually, you run out of doing that. And what happened is that the frustrations accumulate. And what Trump's rise is about is the frustrations. It's about the delegitimation of not sharing in the potentials of America, especially. So that's a different way of thinking about the crisis. It's a crisis of delegitimation because Trump didn't come to power because capital wanted to move to tariffs. They were looking for goodies, the usual goodies that capital wants. They wanted tax cuts, they wanted deregulation, they wanted the privatization that you emphasized so much. They didn't think he was stupid enough or mad enough to get into all this tariff stuff. And now they're shocked. And they're going to try to reverse it. And most of it will be reversed, is what's going to happen. So the question is, how permanent is this era of crazy tariffs? Or are we going to go back to, maybe they'll keep 10% tariffs. By the way, Nixon implemented 10% tariffs in the crisis of the 70s. Didn't change it much. But basically, we don't want to get into we can't predict that this crisis is permanent in an economic sense and is going to continue. It's not impossible to imagine Trump losing, the Democrats coming back, and everything that everybody hated about the Democrats they'll now accept. And that changes politics and everything else. I just want to flag that. The other thing I want to stress is the polarization of options. And I think a lot of what Paramjit was getting at is that there aren't a lot of solutions in the middle. You have to actually get quite radical. And the right has done that. The right has been thinking that way. But the left hasn't. And just a couple of examples, which is, I think, where I kind of disagree with you on a couple of things. the idea that the government can increase its deficit and capital will accept it because it might stimulate the economy doesn't work. Capital looks at the rising deficits, depending on where the money, if it's a subsidy to them, perfect. But if they see the rising deficits because you're raising social programs, they will see this as a reflection of a change in the class struggle that operates against them. And that'll slow down their investment. And it's a global world. They can go other places. So we have to keep those things in mind. The other thing just about China, just very quickly, I don't want to get into a lot of the economics. The high tariffs on China, first of all, they're not tariffs. They're just saying you can't sell goods here, period. The number doesn't matter. None of that is going to create jobs in the United States. Amazon's not going to say, okay, we'll move all our supply lines, which will take about 5 years, but Amazon's not going to move them to the United States. They'll do what they've been doing. They moved them to Vietnam. Maybe they'll start moving them to India. They've been moving it to Malaysia. They've been moving it to Singapore. So it is affecting China, but it's not affecting jobs in the United States. The one place that jobs are really vulnerable is in the auto industry in Canada, because it's the same supply system. It's part of the same industry. It's roughly the same kind of work and pay. So for them to move a plant from Oshawa to Detroit would just be a decision to make. It'll cost them a little bit, but they can make it. So that is in fact very dangerous. Okay, I just want you to keep some of that in your mind, because I think we have to spend a lot of time over the next while thinking all of this through and discussing and debating and clarifying, and especially thinking about, so what does this really mean for the left? And I thought that what Paramjit was an absolutely terrific start. When Matt introduced you as having published 100 articles or so, that was this year.
The past month.
Yeah, no, Paramjit's playing a great role in the SP. It's really valuable to have him here. Okay, get to what I want to get to. I want to talk about the uniqueness of this moment. This is a special moment, and it's especially a unique moment for the left. We've never had an opportunity like this, and it isn't because we invented it. It's because it was forced on us. If it depended on us creating these opportunities, it wouldn't happen. We're not strong enough. So just a quick point about the history of the free trade debates. And as Paramjit raised, in the mid-'80s, into the late '80s, the left and progressives were arguing against further integration into the United States. All of a sudden today, when we're more integrated than ever before, when America's become an uglier place, now the argument is actually we want free trade. So what's going on here? Now this isn't a great change in consciousness, I would say. What's happening is, in both cases, it was the conservatism of capital, but especially workers as well, that determined their response. So in the mid-'80s, people were saying, we don't want to change things, basically. We're integrated into the United States, we just don't want to become more. Now they're saying, we're already integrated, stop kicking us out. So they're being conservative in both cases. The difference is how aggressive Trump has been. That's the big difference. He's talking about us becoming the 51st state. I enjoyed it. I was in New York when the demonstrations were there. There was about 1 million people in New York demonstrating. And one of their slogans was that the United States should become the 11th province, and people loved it. But Trump has been incredibly aggressive. There's nobody that he's treated worse on all of this stuff, only China. And this is his closest ally. It used to be in the 70s that when globalization was accelerating, the Europeans used to complain about the Canadianization of Europe. And what they meant was, we're just becoming a little sop of the United States. Now the question is, wait a second, if Canada starts delinking, if Canada, their best friend, ally, most integrated, then maybe Canada is going to lead something in a different direction, a break from the empire. And so that's interesting. The big question is, what do we do about this? And it's a really difficult question. I'm struggling with it, and I'm going to throw out some thoughts. The starting point has to be sober. We have to start with how incredibly weak we are. I mean, the labor movement has been kicked around for half a century now. You're going back, from the mid-'70s till now. And nothing much has happened. And it's not just because the labor movement is weak, it's because the left hasn't been able to offer much. And it's a left that you have to depend on to actually escape the historical limits and put something else on the agenda, and we haven't done it. So we're starting from this real weakness. On the other hand, we have this opening that has suddenly emerged, where the question of the relationship to the United States is actually being thrown in our face, and the elite just wants to go back to normal. Carney will be thrilled if the United States says we changed our mind and we want things to go back to normal. But there's an opening for us. People are thinking about the relationship, and I think that's the key thing. Now, what we can't do is we should not fantasize about, wow, we got this great opening, and over the next few months something big is going to happen, or in any short term. This is the hardest thing to get into our heads, is that kind of fantasizing. We've been doing it forever. We have to actually say, we better build something this time. And building is something that can only happen long term. It's the long march that we have to think about. There's no shortcuts here. We got to get that into our head. Everything we look at, everything we do, we have to ask one question. Is it building something? Is it building something on the left? We have to create a social force that doesn't exist. Now, to do that, we have to make socialists. We have to create socialists, people who actually understand what we're up against and are committed to doing something about this in the long term. So what the Socialist Project does is it tries to gather some socialists. It's hoping you can gather more. It's hoping that everybody here joins and brings a friend. But we have to get socialists together, and we have to make new socialists, and then we have to develop ourselves. We should do this with some humility. We've got to start learning and developing ourselves. And, I think that's what's so important about what Paramjit is doing. We have to get back to actually understanding political economy. Marx said at one point, philosophers have only interpreted the world or understood the world. The point is to change it. And then he spent the rest of his life trying to understand it. And there's a lesson there. And he also said in the preface to Capital, there's no royal road to science, and only those who do not dread the fatiguing climb of its steep paths have a chance of gaining its luminous summits. And what he was saying is that he just wrote a really fat, difficult book, and if you don't want to read it and try to understand it, you're not going to be in any position to change things. We have to respect the importance of knowledge, and it takes time. So we have to do that in terms of ourselves developing. And then, of course, knowing things isn't good enough. The biggest problem is, I'm looking at Jane when I say this, the biggest problem is actually this question of figuring out how to organize others. How do you take the knowledge that you've developed and democratize it? How do we spread it to other people? Which means engaging them, and when you engage them, you learn more. It's part of your own development at the same time. So we have to figure that out. And to do that, you can't do that unless you're in struggle. You can't do this by philosophizing with people. You have to be in struggle, and if you're going to be in struggle, we have to decide, well, what are we struggling over? What are the campaigns? Which gets to everything that's happening right now, because we're being handed something, and the question is, can we take advantage of it? So in terms of the question of making socialists and gathering them together, I think that's something that a lot of us have been working on. In terms of expanding knowledge and disseminating it, we've had some good success in terms of running the Leo Panitch School. It's been operating really well. We've got an organizing school that's going on. We have to kind of do what we're doing here and start having a series of discussions on a whole bunch of topics. On understanding tariffs more, understanding what's going to happen in the global south. If China can't export to the United States, is it going to export to everybody else? And are they going to like it? What's happening there? We have to understand the dollar. Is the dollar falling? Is that the kind of a crisis we're seeing? Or will the dollar start rising later? We have to understand bond markets. We have to understand these things if we're serious. So we need some humility, and so I think we need to start forming study groups of anybody who's interested, and we'll organize that, and we have to start thinking in terms of public forums where people with different opinions can come together and argue and say you haven't gotten it right. We've got to learn those things. We've been thinking about we need a tabloid, an actual sheet. We handed out something that's a 2-pager because we're trying to learn how to write in 2 pages instead of 17,000 words. And it's a thing that I wrote. It took me maybe an hour to write it, and it took me 25 hours to shorten it. This is a skill. It's a really difficult thing, but we have to learn to do it. And you can do things online. That's useful. You do things online. But the advantage of a pamphlet or something written that's short is you can keep going back to it. And when you hand it out, everyone's kind of having the same discussion. It's like sharing a discussion. Everyone's reading the same thing, and you can start figuring out what to do. So we need this kind of an infrastructure if we're going to be socialists. We need an infrastructure of pamphlets and that kind of information and analysis, and not just analysis, the kind of facts that Paramjit was throwing around. But even that isn't enough. We need some space where we can meet. We actually have to think of an institution and how we institutionalize this. And one of the things that we did after the financial crisis was we argued that we didn't need another demonstration. They come and they go. We actually had to think about a new a new form of working class organization. In the 30s, it's when industrial unionism emerged, exploded in the middle of the Depression. This was the biggest crisis since then, and the question is, would anything new come out? And we tried experimenting with this idea of a workers' assembly. Now, the idea of a workers' assembly was not that it itself was socialist. It was getting people together who were either socialists or interested in socialists or were good militants and were in working class broadly defined. They were fighting over tenants' rights. They were fighting over public health care. They were fighting in their workplace. Some of them were unionized, some not. Some were unemployed. Some were precarious workers. But we tried to get that kind of an institution together, and it was a spatial institution. We were organizing it for Toronto. This is where you organize. You organize locally. And the idea was that other cities would also plan to do this. And if this succeeded, then you could bring them together in their conference every 2 or 3 years. But you're starting to think about a new institutional form that strengthens us. And one of the things that kind of an institution would have to do is socialists within it would have to show that socialist ideas matter. You'd have to be able to work. It isn't to control it. It's to democratically participate in it and show that if you think as a socialist, with a socialist vision and socialist history and socialist understandings, it matters. You come up with better strategies. And so and you come up with better organizing capacities. So that's what it does. So it would engage in all kinds of struggles. We're not asking people to stop their struggles that they're in, whatever it is, in their unions. But it would also give one larger struggle that we all are sharing. And the question is, what would that be? And that's where the question of what Paramjit was raising about delinking how you structure or diversify your economy and exactly what that means. What's going on here is that the issue isn't tariffs. All the tariffs did is it reminded us of how dependent we are in the United States. That's the problem. We're dependent on them. And if we think that we can build a different kind of society, if we think that it's worthwhile having different values, if we just want to say we want Canadian businesses rather than American businesses, okay, you can get that without any kind of a revolution. But if you're really saying we want something different, you have to break the link with the United States. You don't have that choice. It's being forced on us. And if you start talking about delinking, you do have to raise the question of diversification in 2 ways, in terms of your trade, in terms of making different things, because you're not making them for the US, but you are going to have to think about restructuring. If our industries aren't serving the United States, and that's what they've been all geared to, in all their inputs and everything else, it'll be chaos. You're going to have to actually think about what we want to make. And how do we make it? And you can't do that without starting to talk about planning. It's not like ideology says we want to talk about planning. Hello? You don't have a choice. And once you talk about planning, you have to control what you're planning. So you've got to challenge corporate power. And then you have to think about state capacities. The existing state, as Paramjit was saying, is a neoliberal state. It doesn't know how to plan. Certainly doesn't know how to plan for people. That's not what it's about. It didn't develop those skills over the years. What it developed for the previous 100 years was how do we make a capitalist system work? And if it falls, how do we make it sure it works? And how do we step on workers to make sure that happens? So you have to develop state capacities, and one critical thing you have to develop is manufacturing capacities. Because if you really want to change everything about how we work, how we travel, how we live, how we play, everything in offices, everything in the home, every machine in every factory, you have to actually have manufacturing capacities. You have to be able to make things. Now, the way the left has discussed this has been to treat manufacturing jobs as good jobs because they pay higher wages, which actually kind of says, well, if you're an Amazon worker, tough shit. There's no reason why an Amazon worker should be paid less than an auto assembler. It's not that they work less hard. It's because of union power. It's because of organizing. Wages are going to be dependent on whether we can actually organize and struggle in the workplace. The importance of manufacturing is because we need a capacity to transform the world, a physical capacity. And that includes with the question of the environment. If we're going to say that, look, what we can do is start thinking about the environment as an existential necessity. During the war, during the Second World War, 40% of American production was for the military effort. 40% of the economy was geared for that. It took them 18 months to do that. Then after the war, it took them another 18 months to get back to what they used to have. And we've got way more technology and computerization to address this. So, it's thinking in those terms, that the environment is at that scale. The way that a war was thought about before is of that scale. And if we're going to try to address the environment, it is going to be disruptive. There's no way it's not going to be disruptive. But it's not going to mean about a loss of jobs. We're going to have a shortage of jobs. We don't have enough labor, because the environment isn't about slowing things down for the future. It's about fixing all the shit that's accumulated. And there's no way we can do this without having a shortage of labor, which is good. People will work, and they'll be working at something that's socially useful. And then it gets into everything about what I was just saying about planning and everything else. It also means you change priorities. Why are we spending it on the military? There's all kinds of priorities you begin to spell. And this isn't just in the private sector. I think this is just as true in the public sector. That in the public sector, there's all kinds of privatizations. I mean, one of the things that happened with OPSU, I don't know how long ago it was, they had this incredible technology in terms of computerization and software programs, because they needed it for all the things provinces do, for licenses, for keeping track of everybody who's on health care. So what did they do? They decided that we have to be more rational. Let's move on all the technology into one building. So we've got it all really efficient. And then when they moved it into one building, they said, some of this isn't so efficient, let's get rid of it. And then they streamlined it so it was suddenly very profitable. So they privatized it. And then once they privatized it, they said, well, this other stuff we do, we can't actually do it anymore. So now we have to buy it from them. So even in the private sector, this question of capacities is crucial in every dimension. So we have to think about that. And the other thing about thinking, two more other things I just want to emphasize about thinking about the environment is, if you're thinking about the environment, you do have to start thinking about consumption differently. I'm not saying you have to think about people lowering their standards. They might have less of certain things. But you have to think about the satisfactions we can get from collective goods. Better education, better health, more culture, more sports. These are absolutely crucial against the kind of culture. I mean, what competition does, it does two powerful things. One is it strengthens capital, because the weak ones disappear, and who cares, because the big guys take them over. But for workers who compete, their only strength is solidarity. If they compete, that they're finished. And the way workers are paid is that what they get for it is they lose the power to do and to make things and to control things in exchange for the power to consume, the individual power to consume. And so it challenges that. But a really big thing is that one of the selling points of capitalism has always been that we can make more goods, so what do you care if you have a little bit more? If we have 10 times more, you'll be better off. Doesn't work with the environment. Every time they do something in the environment, it's a zero-sum game. If some people are consuming 10 times as much as others, and those are mostly luxury goods, we're all going to suffer. So taking on the environment immediately also gets you to equality. So it gets to everything we want to talk about. Useful jobs, planning, democratic control, equality, and the planet still being there for our grandkids. So this leads to things that I think we can really talk about. It's led to things about thinking about how we do things in the Socialist Project. It's led to how we've tried to do outreach. We haven't gotten anywhere yet with the tabloid, but we're talking about it. I don't think we're united on something like the Assembly, Workers' Assembly again, but one of the conditions for doing the Working Assembly again is that we're honest about everything that was wrong with it. And that has to be, there are a lot of things that were wrong with it, and we have to deal with those soberly. The one area that I think we're really struggling with is how do we get this to unions? Because whatever else happens, there can be movements, there can be uprisings by students, there can be uprisings by immigrants. If the trade union movement, which is the most organized form of working class existence, if the unions aren't there, we cannot win. We will not be able to sustain anything if the unions aren't there. So the question is, how do we get unions to think about this? And one of the points is this question of restructuring. I don't mean it quite like you meant it, but I think that the message we have to get to workers is the world is changing. And you're being restructured all over the place anyways. We used to have 40,000 workers in Oshawa. And we went down to 2,000, and we said we should be converting something. And they said, no, we want to save the last 2,000. It's a natural thing to keep saying. We want to keep saving it until there's nothing there. We have to start thinking about, why don't unions say all their locals, you should have a committee that's looking at restructuring. What do you do? What do you think we can do? We should have research agencies with thousands of young engineers who are thinking about what we could be making and what we could be converting and studying what people need, and saying all unions should be thinking about other plans instead of beating their head against, we'll let capitalism restructure and we'll hope we'll survive and we'll get some subsidies and maybe we'll make some concessions and save our jobs for a few more years. And it shouldn't be that you're scaring the shit out of people and saying to them that you're going to lose your job. It's simply saying you should be ready. And one of the things I found is that once you're talking to workers about conversion and the environment, they actually start reading the newspaper and watching for things. They start becoming environmentalists without you giving them a long lecture. They start getting interested about what's happening. So we have to get unions to do, workplaces to do this, unions to give them information, unions to organize speakers to come and talk about what the world is, what's happening, people to come and talk about the potentials. And we have to think about transforming the state, which we don't talk about. We just think about, we'll replace the people who are there. The state doesn't have the capacity to do these things. If we took over the world tomorrow, we wouldn't know what to do with it. And really, because who taught us how to do anything with it? So we have to really think about creating state capacities, like a conversion agency that you report to that, hey, this company it's not investing enough to keep the thing going. And somebody comes in and checks it. We got to start thinking about transforming the state in every way. So, again, even in the public sector, instead of thinking, now we've got a socialist government in place, we can really get good wages because we're public sector workers. The question is, how would you work differently? Maybe you should form a client council of workers and clients to address people who are on welfare or having trouble and deal with those problems together. If workers just think about themselves, you're just fragmenting each other again. and you're going to get a reaction against it. So these are all the challenges, and ultimately, we need a socialist party. If we cannot have this notion of we're going to change capitalism by doing these things occasionally, and just coming back to it. We need something that's permanent, that has a permanent history. That even if all you wanted to do is education, you'd have to develop people who can do the education and the training, and you'd have to bring them into a room and say, what did you learn when you were talking about all of this? What worked? What didn't work? And so the idea of a workers' assembly is just one of those other things that starts getting us to operate in a different way, that can lead into and create some kind of environment where we can actually say, this thing that we keep postponing, maybe we actually have to address it. Because if we decide that this isn't the right time and we'll just wait, we'll wait forever. And so I think this is the moment. Now, the moment is so important because I actually think that we're being forced to think about some things, and it's creating openings. And the question is, can we take advantage of it? And if we can't, then we're back to the same old shit. But if we can, it's going to raise a million more difficult problems. But I think this is the moment.
Great. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Paramjit. Challenging, I think. So why don't we take some comments or questions?
The question of socialist rebranding that you put. I guess I'm not an organizer. And I'm trying to kind of give an analysis. And then I look to people who are in the workforce, who are engaging friends. I look to them to figure out what is the way to talk to people. And the answer isn't you walk in there and you say, first of all, if you walked in there and you said socialism is going to solve all your problems, it wouldn't be meaningful and it would probably be a lie. I mean, that girl is going to like you too under socialism, etc. And so I just think that's an honest question of figuring out how to talk to people. I just give a couple of examples, and it's related also to what David raised. If you could say if what we were saying to workers in the workplace was in the 50s and 60s, you didn't actually have to think about anybody else. If you were an auto worker, you were probably strong enough that you could win things for yourself. And what a lot of auto workers learned is we don't actually need anybody. We'll be nice to them. We'll run summer camps for them or whatever, but they didn't learn that this was a temporary situation and that the world we're in today, if you're just going to fight things on your own, you're going to lose. That's got to be a big lesson. So what's the lesson? The lesson is you have to think as a class. Doesn't mean that they have to agree to socialism, but if we actually got people to think about what does it mean to think as a class? What does it mean in bargaining? What does it mean about how we organize? That would be a great advance. Or if you said to them, look, anytime you're in a battle, you have to understand your enemy. And you know what? Your enemy might not be your boss. He's a manifestation of it. It's the system. Because your boss is going to say to you, you know what, I'd love to pay you twice as much, but then I'll go broke and you'll lose your job. So you actually have to say, wait a second, what you're saying is that it's the system that's at fault. So you can start doing education around the system. Not not saying ideologically I'm a Marxist and it's a system. Saying just practically speaking, this is the kind of way you have to think about. And when you start thinking that way about class and the system, it will affect the kind of education you do in unions. It affects how you talk to each other. It affects what you think a struggle is. It determines how you measure a struggle. We went on strike. We didn't gain much. Is it successful or a failure? Well, if you actually built some solidarity and you actually learned, a lot from your other workers, something happens. I was in, you might have heard me say this before. I was in Alberta and the casino workers were on strike. And I went to talk with them. I was doing something on oil, but I went to talk with them. And they were incredibly enthusiastic about their strike, and they were all Asian. Everybody was Asian women. And they've got their first strike, and they're enthusiastic. And then this Chinese guy is there, and nobody knows him. Nobody has ever talked to him because he's Chinese. These are South Asians mostly, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi. But here's this guy, Chinese guy, and everyone's just looking at him and kind of hitting each other. Who's that guy? Never talked to him. Where does he work? And then the boss or the manager is driving through the picket line, and he sees this guy, and he calls him over to his car, and he says, "What are you doing here?" And the guy says in perfect English, "I'm on fucking strike, man." And the women just erupted. And all of a sudden, there was a whole different dynamic in this workplace. It wasn't going to be the same anymore. It changed how they think about things. So the question is, when you assess what's success or not, it takes different forms, and we have to keep thinking about that. The other thing I want to say is about the workplace, which I really think is important. I think it's crucial what David raised. I've never spoken to a group of workers in the public or private sector that if you just ask them what they want, they'll start talking about what wages they want. If you actually sit down and talk with them and you raise the question of working conditions, that's all they want to talk about. They can talk about working conditions for hours. Everybody will come to a mic once this is on the agenda. And the problem is they don't think they can change that. And the trade-off has been, if I can't change my working conditions, so just give me some money so I can compensate. It's a good word, compensate. That's what you consider your pay, is compensation. I can compensate for my lousy life by consuming more. So the workplace is critical, and I think that's what the labor movement has lost. They're still fighting the workplace, as workers will still fight, but if you're not fighting in the workplace, in the workplace it's where you live every day. Bargaining is every 4 years. If you're waiting every 4 years and you strike twice in your life, that's not a lot of activity. But if you're fighting over health and safety and production standards every day and dignity, then it's a different ballgame, and you can really build. It's hard to build if you're not fighting in the workplace. And in the case of the Amazon workers, the only way to organize them is to fight over the working conditions and everything they face every day. And if they could organize, because they're organizing that way, and unionize, and then be part of the labor movement, you'd have this incredible thing about the most important union battle in the country, which would be Amazon if we want it, actually is doing it differently and wants to sustain it differently. And they'd be taking that message into the labor movement. So the question of the workplace, I think, is one of the toughest ones that, we haven't cracked. And it isn't just a problem of labor leaders, I want to emphasize. A lot of labor leaders reflect where their members are at. And what you end up with when you're fighting over wages only is workers feel like, look, I paid my dues, you owe me something now. It's an insurance policy. And when you think that way, that's the seeds of bureaucracy. I'm just paying you, you do the job, and then give me something. If you're fighting over working conditions, you got to organize like crazy. You got to organize in every part of the workplace. You got to be able to disrupt, not every 4 years, but when you need to do it, not every minute. But you have to think about what's strategic or not, and then you do need some centralization. So you're coordinating the disruptions. So the workplace is, I think, it's the site that we're going to have to address if we really expect to build the working class. And these aren't easy questions. We haven't solved them because they're not easy questions. But they're the questions we have to struggle with.
Do we need an alternative strategy to respond, or to get people towards socialism? Definitely yes, because we are far behind in comparison to the other groups who are mobilizing people. So reason may be that some people say that we are using more sophisticated vocabulary, right? So we use, but we say things in a difficult sort of vocabulary, which is some people can't understand. So this is one thing that we need to rethink on these issues. So I always tell this thing to Matt that your approach is much better than our approach, because we read something and we use those words and those things, and we don't use common man's language, which is a serious problem. Second is that, so the question that Pam has raised, I think Sam has already responded, the limits of unions. So one thing that I can say about unions, that So bosses are smart people. They have divided the workers vertically within the organization, and they are also divided horizontally. So it is very difficult to bring all those workers together, right? So within organization, you will see that there are different unions within the organization. And they're also divided horizontally, means that workers, workers in one organizations, they don't want to go with workers in other organizations. So that's why the need for a party which can form a minimum critical program to bring all these unions together is critical and very important. You start with minimum with an objective to achieve maximum. It is not possible if unions are fighting of their own without thinking about a party which can bring all these unions together.
You know, I mean, the problem for unions is that they're coping with problems every day. They've got to deal with grievances, they're thinking about their wages because they've got to support their family. The point of a party is it can stand outside of that and think about everything else. It's focused on how do we do what Paramjit's raising? How do we actually bring this together? And for workers, the whole nature of unionization is it's a collection of workers who are in some part of a workplace who have some things in common. It's not the class. Unions are not a class organization. They're a group of workers that are thinking about their particular interests. The point of having a party is someone who's thinking strategically and has that larger overview, and that's what it's doing all the time. And that's a different institution. One of the things that the tariffs do is divert people's attention from the class issues. You know, the really significant thing for American workers is their problem isn't that there's cheap toys coming in from China. They've got a lot bigger problems that the tariffs end up externalizing the problem by blaming China or whoever, and not talking about the class issues around healthcare and the distribution of income and workers' insecurities and everything else. So tariffs, tariffs have served that purpose, and we shouldn't get hung up on. The debate is not are tariffs good or bad. It depends on the context. What we have to be careful of is that small victories, if you don't sustain them, you can learn the wrong lessons. I mean, a part of the skill is actually figuring out what have you learned from your struggles. And that's a really important question. You can either learn that I don't need anybody else, I just won that thing, or you can learn, wow, it looked like we won, and then look what happened, a year later with Tim Hortons when they they got higher wages, now we'll take it out of their pensions. It's learning the limits of what you can win under capitalism, and therefore having to say, yes, we can win things if we fight, and we can build things, but we actually have to think bigger. And if we don't think bigger, we're going to get killed. And that's something that I think we have to think about. I want to give an example in terms of CUPE when they organized. They were organizing the assistants, the non-teaching staff, basically, at CUPE, and they decided that they're probably just going to be ruled back to work. So one of the staffers suggested, and got support from the local union leader, that we better start organizing and educating people so that when they get ruled back to work, they don't just say, well, what can we do? We tried, which is a usual trick that labor leaders will do and nobody blames them. They spent 8 months, and what happened in the end was that the workers actually, to their surprise, the leadership of CUPE, I think, actually thought it doesn't matter. They're not going to strike against the state. That's what people did. They developed the confidence and the understanding and the thought this was necessary, and they stayed on strike. The trouble is that when you start going on strike against the state, not just an employer, you better have the rest of the labor movement there with you. And that wasn't there. So it does raise the question of, wasn't this a wonderful example? What if all unions said, we're not doing that much. We're going to take off a year and just educate and organize and build something. And I thought it was a shame that people didn't jump on that example instead of blaming each other for whose fault it was and actually say this is what the labor movement should be doing. Two quick questions on the broadening it. What Laurel raised, it's obviously important. The working class is diverse and it's everything. It's most of it is a service sector and all kinds of things that are ambiguous. So yeah, that's got to be what this project is about. It's about becoming bigger in all dimensions of people's lives and in all the different shapes. It's actually building something out of diversity without trying to erase the diversity, as somebody was suggesting. I'll just say something quickly on social democracy, because we're taking a lot of time up. I see the difference between social democrats, like the NDP or some progressives, and socialists in two ways. Social democrats don't actually believe that the world can be changed. We've got capitalism, we just have to make it better. And that affects everything. That affects how you think about everything, how you understand things, and how you educate things. And it's linked to the fact that they also don't believe that workers can change the world. Those two things go together. So you end up with those two issues. And there's a third dimension of it, is that you can have all the good policies you want. The question isn't, can we invent radical policies? We can sit around and make radical policies on a piece of paper. The question is, to implement them, you have to change power. And social democrats are afraid to do that. And part of the reason they're afraid to do that is they're trying to get the respect from business. They want to show business that if we get elected, you can trust us to just manage things. And so all those things combine to, you're not building anything. You're not building a different vision, you're not building people's capacities, you're not addressing power. So of course, you get what we see. Social democracy has failed everywhere because the options are polarized. If you're not ready, to think bigger and challenge power and change more radical things, you can't win. You might win the odd victory, but they'll get you. And on the other hand, we have to say, well, socialists haven't figured this out either, to be honest about it. And that's what we have to struggle with, because social democracy has no answer. It's not just that they failed. There's no search for an answer there. And I think that socialists are thinking about, how do we take ordinary people and give them the confidence and the skills and the organization to have confidence in not just taking on the employer, but changing the world. That's a big task. But that's the challenge for us. And that's the only, what else can you do with your life? This is a meaningful thing to do with your life. And that's what being a socialist is. And that's not what being a social democrat is.
Maybe. You don't have anything to add, Paramjit, at all?
I think Sam covered all that.
Sam stole them. So we might wrap up for the evening, because it is getting close to 9 o'clock. I think we've identified tonight a few kind of levels of action that we need to take, right? We're talking about kind of a broad, kind of class-based political action, right? Building towards that. Then a step below that, we're talking about the kind of organizational step. What kind of organizations can we build that are able to do this? Is something that Sam really touched on. We have to build socialists. Yes, all those things are true. But it's also true that we have an individual role to play in this, each of us in this room, right? So capitalists and the current state and the people who are kind of running this whole thing, not this event, society, currently, no, we set the rules here. They would much rather, and maybe this is obvious, but they would much rather us not care, right? They would much rather us be debating about Carney and Polyev and even Singh than thinking about how to actually challenge any of this stuff directly, right? When we're talking about building a working class-based organization, we have to build it. It's not just about screaming out into the ether and hoping it arrives. There's a whole group of people in this room here. There's people doing this work already in Toronto and Canada and other countries as well who are experiencing very similar things in unique ways, but very similar things. And certainly in the global south, this is happening, where people are thinking very seriously about what we actually have to build. Is that there's two aspects to this, right? There's the defending working people now, which is something that Justice for Workers in particular has been doing a very good job of doing and advocating for and building campaigns around, not just them, there's many others as well. But these kinds of community-based campaigns, workplace-based campaigns, we have to participate in, right? We have to defend the rights and interests of working people and win gains for all the reasons people identified. We must build the capacity to fight back and fight for these things as well at the same time, and that means actually doing it. Right? And that means actually being a part of organizations that are doing it as individuals, right? It means actually getting engaged in doing these things. Maybe many of us in the room already are. That's great, but I'd say kick it up a notch as well, right? So, just on that piece, in the Socialist Project, we're not the only group considering this, we're not the only group working through these things, but it is something that we're grappling with ourselves, right? And it's something we want to work on with others. So if you're also in that situation, or you have a group of friends or coworkers or people who are doing activism who are also looking to be in a place, in a space, to have those kind of conversations and do this work, and are looking for a political home, the Socialist Project is there as an option for you. So if anyone is interested in talking to us, or in even getting looped in with other groups doing similar work that we can funnel you to, perfectly fine. Come and speak with any of us afterwards. We've got the room until like 10 o'clock, so people can hang out. So unless there's anything else, thanks everyone for coming.